Call me Ishmael. Some years ago, never mind how long precisely, having little or no money in my purse, and nothing particular to interest me on shore, I thought I would sail about a little and see the watery part of the world. It is a way I have of driving off the spleen and regulating the circulation. Whenever I find myself growing grim about the mouth, whenever it is a damp, drizzly November in my soul, whenever I find myself involuntarily pausing before coffin warehouses and bringing up the rear of every funeral I meet, and especially whenever my hypos get such an upper hand of me that it requires a strong moral principle to prevent me from deliberately stepping into the street and methodically knocking people's hats off, then I account it high time to get to sea as soon as I can. This is my substitute for pistol and ball.
Welcome to PequodPod, the podcast on the wonder world of Herman Melville. My name is Tristan.
I'm Meg.
And call me Jonny.
As this is PequodPod's inaugural episode, it behooves us to give you all a peep into what to expect from the show.
Starting with Moby-Dick, each episode will be a deep dive into roughly a chapter's worth of material from the book in question. We aim to sound the depths of these books with close readings and follow Melville through his tangents, mundane and divine.
Now, we expect that it's going to take rather a long time to get through Moby-Dick in this level of detail, but we believe that our monomaniacal inclinations will power us through. And after Moby-Dick, we would prefer to apply the same treatment to other works by the man himself.
As a supplement to these main narrative episodes, we will also be releasing special guest episodes to discuss all things Melville. If you have ideas for such episodes, feel free to send us a message on our socials.
Now, onto the show. Okay, well, welcome to the show, everybody. Now, before we get started, I think it makes sense for each of us hosts to introduce ourselves so you can get a sense of who we are and why we're doing this project. So I'll go first. My name is Tristan Bavol-Marques. I'm the originator of the idea for the PequodPod podcast. First and foremost, I'm a father, and I'm trained as a linguist. I went to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Go Heels! And there I did mainly language documentation work and linguistic field work, specifically studying a language called Purépecha, which is from Michoacán, Mexico.
Hi, my name is Meg Fancher. I'm beaming to you from hot Atlanta, where it is incredibly warm and right now rather damp. So if you look out the window, it's really beautiful and sort of wet and Oregonian. But if you step outside, it hits you like a linebacker and is either horrible or lovely, sort of depending on your constitution. So that is itself a Melvillian question. I got my PhD here very recently from one of our fine Atlanta institutions, and that is where I first encountered the work of our beautiful author, which we can get into in more depth in a couple minutes here.
And I'm Jonny Wiles. I'm predominantly a theatre type. I'm an actor and a director. And I also wrapped up on a PhD last year, though not on Melville. It was on medieval Italian literature and mainly on Dante. And those two sort of strands of my life feed directly into my love of Melville for reasons that I hope we'll get into over the course of this reading project. I mean, Melville is a wonderfully theatrical writer in many ways, and there's also a real epic strain to his work, and not just in Moby-Dick. So he's the perfect storm for me and for people like me. So that's why I'm here.
Wonderful. Thank you both very much for introducing yourselves. Why don't we start off by talking a little bit about how each one of us first got into Melville and what that first experience of reading Moby-Dick was like for each of us. So my first encounter with Moby-Dick was in the form of a heavily abridged version of the book designed for children that my beloved grandfather, George Hilton, gave to me. He was, my grandfather, a huge Moby-Dick fan. It's definitely his favorite book. And so I think some of my attachment to the text stems from that relationship. But yeah, I didn't actually read the full text of Moby-Dick until I was in college. It wasn't for a course or anything like that. It was just I found a copy in a thrift shop, like a normal copy, so I decided to read it, and it blew me away. I think I can safely say that one of the most profound sort of spiritual reactions to reading any text came from reading Moby-Dick, and specifically reading through to the end of Moby-Dick. And what about you, Meg? I believe it's the case that you read Moby-Dick for school, yes?
Correct. So yeah, something that you do when you're getting, I think, any sort of flavor of like an English PhD is you have to take a big exam called your comps, your comprehensive exam. And you're presented with a big list of canonical or sort of like quasi-canonical works in English or translation that you need to read to be able to sort of back up the idea that you can put a thought together and sort of compare works and you understand where things came from. You can talk about genre, etc. And one of these books was Moby-Dick. And I was like, never encountered anything by this man in school. I've never had occasion to do this before. My expectation of it, which I think is the same, to speak broadly, to assume, I imagine is the same expectation sort of on the street that a lot of people have, which is that it's a giant mid 1800s novel. So that probably means it's like incredibly dense, very difficult to get through, whatever that means for sort of like any individual person, or what my mother would call a slog. So I was like, all right, I'll get it. I'll buy a copy because I expect I'll have to take a really long time and I might have to write sort of annotate it as I go along so I know what's going on. And then, as everyone in this room knows, or perhaps everyone listening, is that pretty much immediately you're like, wait, this is a deeply strange and way stranger container than anybody told me. Like, nobody told me this. Like, I feel like when you go in to see a weird movie, someone has told you that it's a little odd, and you're a little bit prepared for that, even if you don't know the plot. And here I feel like I thought I knew the plot, and I think I was, basically everyone is right about that. But to actually open it, you're like, oh, the way we're doing this is, I could not have predicted this. So the experience of reading it was so fun. I think it's very funny. The way that it digresses is really beautiful. Weird things are given the joy of like an entire chapter. It was a really crazy experience. And I was like, I feel like the book at least deserves to have like a street reputation as a way weirder thing than it does. So I'm really excited to sort of talk with you guys about the way that the book, your expectations of it were met, or like the places and the ways that it got exciting in a way you didn't think, or maybe someone did tell you it was weird and you were like, indeed, this is, I feel like I knew what I was getting into it. But for me, it was a complete surprise. And what's really lovely is that a lot of his works are like that. So definitely I will be reading things for the first time in the coming months or years. But this one I've read a couple times. So I'm really, really excited to talk about all the juicy strangeness over the next few decades. I think it's going to take us to get through all of this.
What about you, Jonny?
Well, I'm like you two. I never studied Melville at school either. I came up through the UK education system, and to my knowledge, it's not on any UK school syllabus. Like you, Meg, I first read Moby-Dick at university, though it happened pretty much under duress and not because of any course. I studied Italian literature and language for my undergrad degree, but most of my close friends were studying English literature. And the way that their course worked is that they had what were called author weeks. So they'd spend a week intensively reading the works of a particular author, and then they'd write an essay on the author in the following week. So they had Woolf Week, for example, and Dickens Week, and Joyce Week, and so on. And so we'd sit down to have dinner during those weeks. And of course, we'd talk mostly about the authors that they were working on. And in the case of the authors that I've named, I was just about able to keep up. I mean, I'd read a bit of Woolf by then. I did fine with Dickens. I think I'd more or less made it through Ulysses at that point. And then we got to Moby-Dick week. And that's not Melville week, be it noted. It was Moby-Dick week.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I hadn't read Moby-Dick. And so I was hanging out with these mates, and you just could not get them to talk about anything else. So I realized if I'm going to have any kind of social life for the next 2 weeks, I've got to read this book. And so I did, and I felt just hook, line, and sinker for it, just right from the start. So I know a lot of students in the US are kind of press ganged into reading it at school. I don't know how to what degree you were pressured into reading it, Meg, when you started your course, but I was pretty much peer pressured into reading Moby-Dick. But it worked, and that's why I'm here, and we can psychoanalyze that another time. But I'm delighted that it happened, and yeah, likewise, Meg, I'm so excited to talk about the cumulative weirdnesses of this text that I also was just totally unprepared for, and which we start to get a little inklings of actually in this very opening chapter.
Yes, in the very opening chapter.
Wonderful. So, quick disclaimer for our audience. You'll note that we're starting this pilot episode with Chapter 1, Loomings, but that does not mean we are skipping Etymology and Extracts. So the second episode we're going to release as episode 0 will be on Etymology and Extracts, so you can put down your pitchforks for now. Meg, would you be willing to give us a brief synopsis of this Chapter 1, Loomings, please?
So Loomings is essentially, as Jonny read to us our opening paragraph, our narrator, Ishmael, speaking to us from a sort of non-specified space, talking to us, his listener readers, that he's been in kind of a funk for a while and wants to go to sea. This has been a pattern that perhaps has hit him a couple times before, and he recognizes the signs. He wants to go out and start getting into fights for no reason, or maybe like do something drastic with himself. Who knows? But he's in the mood, and he knows what it means. He has to get on a boat. He illustrates, or he argues that this is not a drive or a hunger that is unique to himself, but in fact that if you walk around the city of the island of Manhattan, you'll see evidence in the citizens of New York that there seems to be something inside the human spirit, or the shared sort of human society, that wants to like stare at the ocean or travel by sea or be on a beach or put it in our paintings or talk about it in our religions, where it had the sea as concept and as literally like physical going and standing in it has a big hold over humanity. And he's kind of just like, what's up with that? And like, we're going to put a pin in that and we'll come back to it later. And then at the very end, he sort of says, is it fate that brought me here? It seems like it is. It seems like this is kind of preordained. Like every once in a while, I just got to go do it. He compares it to a bill put out by Providence that this is big news. Ishmael's getting on a boat again, which I think is the first. We'll get into it, but that's very funny. And in perhaps most intriguingly, because of the expectations that the reader brings to the novel Moby-Dick, in our penultimate paragraph, he talks about that he wants to see a whale. It seems like this is not something, the way that he speaks about it, it seems like this isn't something that has happened before, but it holds great intrigue over him. And then chapter kind of ends. He's not in the sea yet, but we know what his quest is. Whether it's a capital Q quest, we don't quite know. Does quest begin with Q? Yes. Capital Q quest, we don't quite know. But this is the thing that he wants. This is his Little Mermaid, part of this world, I want song. He wants to go to sea. So what's going to happen next? Who knows? Maybe he'll try and find some way to do that.
Thanks so much, Meg. So yeah, let's talk about that. Jonny, what do you think of this protagonist of ours, Ishmael?
I think he's absolutely fascinating in the first instance because he, on the one hand, is very, very forthcoming with information about himself. On the other hand, he seems to, in equal measure, be incredibly secretive. It's an old truism about that first sentence, call me Ishmael, that he seems to be called anything but Ishmael. Somebody who is called Ishmael is not the kind of person, the person who says, call me Ishmael, almost certainly does not actually bear the name Ishmael. Mm-hmm. It's the kind of thing, if I don't, my full name is Jonathan, but I'm only ever Jonathan when I'm in trouble. So I said immediately, whenever anybody sort of says, "Oh, Jonathan," I said, "Oh, well, hi, well, call me Johnny." It's the kind of thing, but Ishmael, to my knowledge, is not short for anything. But it just seems that immediately, while he's being, in theory, very forthcoming with his biography, with his identity, there is a sense that he is actually obfuscating some fairly crucial aspects of himself.
Yeah, totally. I think it's very important that our protagonist isn't saying, "Hi, my name is Ishmael," right? Besides that, not sounding nearly as good. I do think there's a real significance to the call me. And sometimes I even hear it more like a "call me Ishmael," as if our protagonist is, searching for the right biblical allusion to convey the essence of his character. Instead of anything biographical.
In our very first opening lines, we get, of course, our iconic "call me," but then immediately next it says, "some years ago, never mind how long precisely," which tells us that we are in a rhetorical container of one of my favorite kinds, which is a present day, past facing storyteller. So the story in its entirety has already happened. It's not past. A lot of novels are past tense, but that's more or less just the present. That's just the verb tense that the author has chosen, and it's not a big deal. And sometimes, in some of my favorite books, the very first chapter is, "This happened to me a long time ago." So it tells us, unless we're doing something super radical, that our narrator has survived the events, but for some reason, there's a chronological distance, which usually implies something like maturity or like regret, or I can interpret these in a different way than I would have were this happening to me in real time. So when you pair this is a possible reading, when you pair that with a phrase like "call me," which is not the same thing as "my name is," as you've just said, that can imply something like even further distancing myself from that identity that I had when it was happening to me. Or you can read it as like casual, and it's just like, sure, this thing happened to me a long time ago, and a lot of books were kind of written like that, no big deal. But I think there's something really juicy and fun about as much ambiguity as you want to put onto that. It seems like the chapter can hold that, and we can sort of be like, what's happened to him in the years since? Does the end of the novel get to present day? It seems like not. It seems like it's been years. So what's going on with sort of that? He seems to give us the inside of his soul, but also we don't know his last name. Is this a person who has a last name? It seems like that's not important. He doesn't seem to think that that's important. So some of the challenge or the pleasures for us in sticking with this guy for 600 pages is, are we going to learn more? Do we want to? And is that something that makes sense for us to ask?
I think you've hit on several things that are really interesting and important there, Meg. Perhaps chief among which you mentioned, well, is this just a casual thing that Ishmael is doing? We're going to spend a lot of time with Ishmael, and I think we get a sense that even in this chapter, he doesn't do much casually. Perhaps he doesn't even do anything casually. In fact, he is consistent. No, he doesn't seem to be able to, and that in itself is fascinating. He's very, very quick to search for meanings behind things, and indeed to ascribe meanings to things. I mean, we get that single sentence about halfway through the chapter. "Surely all this is not without meaning," which could basically be a sort of subtitle to Moby-Dick.
Moby-Dick, yes.
Yeah, Moby-Dick or
God,
the whale, or "Surely all this is not without meaning."
That's so funny.
I think the other thing that is going to be absolutely key to bear in mind as we confront this chapter, but also as we confront Moby-Dick as a whole, is we have, in a sense, two Ishmaels, don't we? We have, as you point out, Meg, we have the Ishmael who is telling us the story, and we have the Ishmael to whom the events of the narrative are happening.
Yes. The Catcher in the Rye problem.
Precisely.
I think of it in my mind. Yes.
Yeah. I've immediately stolen that. So I should well be using that as a phrase throughout these episodes. But for all that he wants to point towards the meanings of things and the kind of as close as he can get to the objective significance of things, he's prepared to layer ambiguity upon ambiguity in his own presentation of himself. We've already unpacked call me Ishmael. Well, okay, does that mean that he's called Ishmael? Does that mean that he's called something else? Some years ago, okay, how many? Never mind how long precisely. Okay, so we're actually not supposed to be concerned about that. Having little or no money in my purse. Well, hold on. Is it little money or is it no money? Because there's a big difference. He goes on to talk about the delight of being paid later in the chapter, so we're clearly meant to think about these things. So he is a character who is so prepared to steer us towards meaning, but still just sets himself at so many removes of ambiguity, right from the word go. He's a slippery individual.
For sure, he is. Absolutely. Yeah, and I think there's a relationship between like this ambiguity with this protagonist with what you get in some of Melville's previous works before Moby-Dick. So Typee and Omu are supposed to essentially be autobiographical, right? These are things that actually happened to me, Herman Melville, whether he's called Herman Melville or Tom O, in my actual life and my travels in the Pacific. And people attacked him at the time with claims that these are he's lying basically, and to a certain extent, like there's truth to these stories, but they are fictionalized to a certain degree or other. And he plays this up in Marty too, his third book after Typee and Omu, where he basically says, people thought that I was writing fiction when I wrote Typee and Omu. Maybe if I write something that's so outlandishly fiction, this romance of the South Seas, then people will actually think this is true. And I think we get something a little bit similar here in Moby-Dick, where there is increased ambiguity, and to a certain extent, we do see some clear biographical parallels between Ishmael and Herman Melville. But yeah, there is this increased ambiguity. Moving in a different direction, to what extent are y'all familiar with the biblical Ishmael?
I can try and have a go at summarizing the story of Abraham and Hagar, Tristan, but I'd prefer you to do it.
Yeah, no worries. For sure. So this is going to go back to Genesis in your Hebrew Bible or Old Testament. And specifically, Ishmael is Abraham's firstborn son, but by Hagar. So Abraham and Sarah are married, but Sarah is barren. And so Abraham has a child by Hagar, and Hagar being Sarah's handmaid. And so Ishmael is sort of this, it is this firstborn son, but also kind of like a bastard son in a sense. And later, Sarah will be, by God's miracle, become pregnant with Isaac, who will be sort of this beloved son. And so what I think is important for Melville's choosing of this particular name is the fact that Hagar and Ishmael are sent off into the wilderness, right? So in the biblical, Ishmael is supposed to be the progenitor of the Arabs. But what I think is really crucial here is that Ishmael is sort of this bastard, cast off, orphan in a sense, disinherited person. And I think those are the qualities that I think are crucial to Melville's Ishmael, right? This sense of being rejected from the world, or of losing one's birthright, being kind of cast off. So I think that's the critical part of this biblical allusion. And I also think that there's a real resonance between this first line and the very last line of the book. But we'll save that for now. We'll save that for later when we get to it eventually.
Yeah. Always be careful what you name your characters. Because if there's been one character, a real person with that name, whether you mean it to or not, that connection is going to be made, and then you have to do something with it. Just keep that in mind.
I think the other point maybe to make about where the biblical allusion actually sits within the text of the Bible is really, really important to this opening chapter as well, because it's from Genesis. And there are several different ways in which Moby-Dick as a whole, but especially Loomings, is setting up a relationship with the Bible as a text. We get what I think is one of the most sublime epithets in all of literature to refer to Adam and Eve a bit later in the chapter, right? The act of paying is perhaps the most uncomfortable infliction that the two orchard thieves entailed upon us, which I just absolutely adore.
That's cool.
But so those references to Genesis recur in this chapter, and of course they abound throughout the text as a whole. The reason I think Genesis is especially important to touch on while we're talking about Loomings, in addition to all the brilliant stuff that you've just said, Tristan, is Genesis is very, very occupied, as you two know, and as our listeners will know, with the idea of beginnings, right? In the beginning, there was the Word, and the Word was God. Here, we are starting a chapter which immediately sets itself with reference to something that happened some years ago. So it's setting itself up actually as a text that very explicitly is not the Bible. And to compound complexity on complexity there, we're reading this thing that is called chapter 1, but it is by no means the start of the book. So Moby-Dick as a text has a really fraught relationship with its methods of beginning. And I think part of the way in which Melville is orchestrating that for us is by setting it in dialogue specifically with the book of Genesis. Moby-Dick almost begins with a reference to what it isn't, before it has anything to do with sort of setting up what it actually is.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I do want to note, just because we've got such attentive listeners, that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, is actually from the Gospel according to John. But to your point, that's actually supposed to be reminiscent of and a callback to Genesis, so it makes a lot of sense.
Oh my goodness, we're circling back to
Back.
things.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah, and to continue with some of these religious themes, and specifically Christian themes, I see in this chapter Ishmael really wrestling with some what I would consider core Christian concepts. You had mentioned before, Johnny. Here, let me find it. About the two orchard thieves and paying. Here, okay, so. But being paid, what will compare with it? The urbane activity with which a man receives money is really marvelous, considering that we so earnestly believe money to be the root of all earthly ills, and that on no account can a moneyed man enter heaven. Ah, how cheerfully we consign ourselves to perdition. So you've got this harkening back to especially like thinking about something like the Book of Acts. Like a really crucial aspect of early Christianity is this basically swearing off allegiance to mammon, to money, and to private property, if you will, and comparing that to trying to live in this early industrial capitalist world, right? It's basically impossible to do this, and then also you've got. Let me find it. I abandon the glory and distinction of such offices to those who like them. For my part, I abominate all honorable, respectable toils, trials, and tribulations of every kind whatsoever. Another sort of, casting off of the search for worldly recognition and worldly status, which again is very crucial to what we might think of an early Christianity, but also specifically in this time period when people are really grappling with what it means to live in this changing, industrializing, capitalistic world. Trying to harken back to some of this older ideas of Christianity. And you get these sorts of religious revivals, especially in the United States around this time, really addressing some of these fundamental issues and dissonances of this modernizing life.
I think it's also part of the capital R romantic anxieties of the text. What does it mean to put a dollar sign on every tree, on every trip that you take? Is it possible for me to interact with the world without a job? I hate that I've been brought to a place where I feel better if I'm being paid. This is a corrupt way to be interacting with nature, but I also have to be able to feed myself. These are practical things that a normal person would think about. But in terms of what we put in a book, these are romantic anxieties, as like a reflexive reaction to the industrialization and the Enlightenment coming from us a century beforehand. There are things that our American authors also really liked talking about, because then that combines with the idea of like, I'm special in this big group. I see these things that maybe other people aren't seeing. Like the way that I earn money is different. And it's sort of like, whether or not that's true, some authors were able to kind of look on that from sort of like God's eyes. And that's certainly something that we'll be tracking through the novel as a whole. The idea of capitalism having to be the way that you are able to do this wonderful thing, which is go across the ocean. But it's a romantic anxiety. What has happened now that that we're measuring everything and that everything has a cost, and this is the way that we have to talk to each other. And the only way I can get a really good roasted chicken is if I can pay for it at this bed and breakfast.
Yeah, better be judiciously buttered.
Oh, hell yeah. Oh, yeah. A compote.
I get the feeling that Ishmael is going to be bitterly disappointed by the bill of fare on the Pequod. Does he really think that he's getting broiled fowl? Surely one expects sort of ship's biscuit and steaks and things. I mean, I certainly don't think I don't think the cook on the Pequod is up to broiled fowl. I mean, we'll meet him at in quite a few episodes' time, but yeah. This sort of green Ishmael that we see right at the beginning of this of the text is he's setting himself up for a culinary disappointment.
For sure. He's about to get some of the best chowder on the planet, though, in a couple of chapters. So don't even play about the clam chowder he is about to have at a hotel. Just thinking about it makes me feel crazy.
So to what extent do y'all see an autobiographical flavor to the character of Ishmael?
Well, there's certainly the biographical consideration that Melville was a schoolmaster and then a sailor, as Ishmael was. The journey that the Pequod undertakes, mild spoiler, I believe exactly mirrors, or is the exact reverse of, a whaling voyage that Melville went on when he was more or less just a ship's hand on or sort of an everyday sailor on a whaling voyage. We might also want to point out that Melville throughout his life struggled with mental health difficulties, as we very, very clearly see Ishmael doing at the opening of the novel. So there are some very sort of biographical details in terms of sort of factual details about their lives, where they went, what they did, but also we might sort of think about commonalities in the interiorities of the two individuals as well, how they deal with what Ishmael calls their hypos.
Yeah, you also get here. Let me find it. It touches one's sense of honor, particularly if you come of an old established family in the land, the Van Rensselaers or Randolphs or Hardicanutes. Sorry if I butchered any of those Dutch names to our Dutch listeners. But there's a autobiographical aspect to that as well, because Melville, on his maternal line, so his grandfather, his mother's father, was a Revolutionary War hero and a well-to-do citizen by the name of Gansevoort. And so I do think you see here, both with Melville and with this character Ishmael, this sense of like family, like a family in decline, or like a proletarianization, or this like downward mobility, where like Ishmael and Melville, right, is taking a job as a sailor, right, which is far beneath what would have been the class expectations of like his parents, or especially his parents.
Yeah, there's a deep, deep solitude to him. And it's another one of those sort of paradoxes of his own nature, and perhaps it exists within us all as well. I'm really fascinated by that line, that one of the first meditations that we get from Ishmael about the ocean, which must in some way mirror Melville's own feelings. When he says he gives the account of the his hypos and the kind of the really, really strong reactions that he has when he's on shore, and the idea that getting out to sea is some kind of cure for him. And then he says, there is nothing surprising in this. If they but knew it, almost all men in their degree, some time or other, cherish very nearly the same feelings towards the ocean with me. And I'm really interested in that statement of Ishmael's, but potentially also that feeling of Melville's, of that desire to feel a common feeling with one's fellow individual about the ocean, but also to be slightly different. There's a real battle to simultaneously to belong and also to be an individual, right? Very nearly the same feelings, not exactly the same, because that would mean that Ishmael is just another face in the crowd, that Melville is just another face in the crowd.
Yeah, I think something that is always present in really good boat media, which is a genre that I love, is I was an outcast, or I was like a weirdo on land, but in this fake community that we have made on this ship so that we don't go insane, I am critical. And if you put a lot of weird people on a boat and we still have to do the social contract, what happens? Can I still be strange? So in this first chapter, as you guys have been talking about, the community that he puts himself in is very abstract. It's like healthy men. Well, that's a big group of people. He's not talking to a friend when he's saying these things. He's talking to us who aren't there with him. And then he's talking about humanity, which is like fair enough. But he's still, the thrust is he feels alone. He does not feel good. That's why he's going to sea. Something that's interesting that we're going to see over these next, the New Bedford section is he able to do anything on land to sort of slack this feeling of almost dangerous isolation? We'll see in sort of what interesting ways the answers are yes and no. But then once the boat person is on the boat and we have made this new version of the town so that we can survive and do our job and come back, does he, in what ways, or what is the machine, what are the tools that make it possible for him to be capable of finding a place in this new family? And spoiler alert, it involves sperm. We'll get there. It could have on land. What was stopping him? But in any case, that's quite far off. So for the opening chapter to be so much like, I am alone, and yet I am part of a huge group of people who all feel the same way, but I have to get out of here, is super interesting. And is really kind of the thrust of a lot of kind of like, I don't want to say anti-hero literature, but any of that same sort of like really capital M, I'm doing this a lot, capital M modernist prose that we're going to get in like a century. It's not that people weren't sad on the page before, but the way that it is put on the page is cool and sort of troubling and like really beautiful in a way that we wouldn't return to for a while. So it feels really, really contemporary, the way that Ishmael is talking to us about the way that he doesn't feel good, incredibly explicitly. I do this so I don't kill myself. Feels like we wouldn't be making jokes about that for a long time. It would take a world war. But the fact that we get someone whose voice almost seems so sprightly, almost like Wodehouseian in certain parts, but that he's the driver of this car, and it's so idiosyncratic and so funny and so beautiful. The things that he's talking about, as he claims, are things that we all feel, but we're trapped in this guy who's going to be taking us on a really specific, like, rhetorical trip to sea, that if we were on one of the healthy boys on the piers, if he went to sea, it would be completely different. But we know we're stuck with this guy. And that's so important for an opening chapter to cement in so many ways.
Yeah. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about the sea or the ocean. So the ocean takes up such a big chunk of this chapter, how people are drawn to it, and also to just water in general, how people are drawn to that. Jonny, what do you make of this?
I don't know about you two. I've certainly felt that meditative, very sort of reflective quality that water, and specifically the ocean, seems to impart to Ishmael, and indeed the Manhattoes that we get described just on the edge of the water. That resonates enormously with me. I think it was probably one of the first things that that struck me about reading the text, especially in a text that actually remains landlocked for quite a while. Again, minor spoiler, but it takes us quite a while. It takes us quite a few chapters to get to sea. This is actually
Very true. We're in a hotel for a long time. Yeah, it's like I thought we wanted to get going. What are we doing? Yeah, okay, it's a nice hotel.
But what's lovely about that is it's also it works as a kind of it's a very protracted leave taking of the land, until we get to that magnificent chapter that we will do in sort of roughly 19 episodes time, the lee shore, which is a wonderful kind of farewell to the land and an embracing of the ocean. But we get a wonderful foretaste of that here. This is a very it sounds like the most obvious thing to say in the world. Moby-Dick is a very oceanic text, but I mean that also in terms of how it's structured, in terms of its ebb and flow, and in terms of the prose style right from the get-go here. So I love the way that this kind of the kind of ebbing and flowing, the way that we've got these wonderful kind of sprawling, almost Proustian sentences that kind of remind one of the kind of the rolling and the breaking of a wave, but then we've got those incredibly sort of punchy short sentences. There's a wonderful kind of oceanic unpredictability about the way that this chapter is even put together. So it speaks to the way that, yes, this chapter in this text is all about the ocean, but it is just so informed, even in terms of how it seems to be working. It's structured in a very kind of tidal way as well.
Yeah, I think the way that you're talking about the thing being described is also the metaphor for the way it is being described is that needs to be pinned to the top of sort of our discussion of the book as a whole. My favorite part of him talking about this whole thing, which is so beautiful, in the middle where he's making his argument that we all want to get to sea at some point, or it's important for us to stand in front of it. Which I think he's completely right. If you feel this is why people were taking like what do they call like rest stays or something like this woman is going crazy. Put her by the ocean. It's like, well, maybe you were wrong for the right reasons, but yes, maybe she does need to go to the ocean. As everyone knows, meditation and water are wedded forever. And I think it's so funny. What's about to happen is when we're actually on the ocean, as we take on a giant meditative project, which we'll see in like 8 years when we get to that section. The promises he's making here are quite big. So on the one hand, we're like, are we going to do anything we're on this boat? Are we just going to look at the sea? Because it almost seems like I think it's fun to sort of think about the idea that he just wants to be on a boat, but in order to do that, to circle back to something we were talking about before, is that he has to be paid to do it. He doesn't want to travel somewhere, but he also can't be a cook. So he basically needs to do like a job. And the way that he's going to interact with the ocean has to be through that way. And that's kind of a shame, but he also takes pride in being able to do a task. So like whatever, that's going to be fine. But the ocean physically below, but also like all around him, is going to almost in spite of anyone's better judgment or the things that they think that they can do when they're out there, is it will sort of like infect is not the right word. Sounds unpleasant, but sort of like you become an ocean citizen. And that is different than the land version of yourself. We could say something like maybe the metaphor would maybe be like elevating or like purifying, which we know is not true. And that's something Melville's going to do with like the way that we interact with the ocean in the whaling industry is not good, but that's the way that this guy can get to sea. But if the ocean is built for meditation, what does that do to the soul to be out there trying to meditate? Like your heart is like, I got to meditate. But your brain is like, I got to kill a whale, because that's why I'm allowed to be on the ocean. These kind of like cross purposes, and which one is going to be stronger. You want to say it's the ocean because it's the ocean, but like, who knows? These are some big questions that he's posing. And Jonny, like you said, it's funny because we're not going to get on the sea for a while. And yet it's a sea town. Everybody's thinking about it all the time. We don't leave these considerations, even though we aren't on the sea yet. But the actions he has to take and the people he has to talk to and the relationships he has to enter into in order to get onto the boat are also intriguing and part of that larger sort of meditative, where do I belong project.
There's something wonderfully Shakespearean about that as a technique, and that we have to wait to actually get out onto the ocean.
Right.
The thing that's been talked about an awful lot. People spend quite a long time talking about Macbeth until he actually sets foot on sea. Brave Macbeth. Roughly unseeming people from the nave to the chaps and all that kind of thing. The same thing happens in Othello, but less in King Lear. But that's we are made to form our own opinions about the protagonists of a Shakespeare poem or in a Greek tragedy. And then the person actually appears on stage, and then we have those opinions either confirmed or denied for us. And I think exactly the same thing is happening here with the ocean, and also, crucially, with the whale.
The whale. We're like, I know we're not going to see that whale until we're on the ocean, so let's go. And he's like, no. First, you need a roommate.
Wonderful. And we come back to what you were saying so brilliantly earlier, Meg, about the way that the text is so wonderful at kind of mirroring the experience of what the text is about. I suppose in kind of academic jargon we call that mimesis, right? The text is mirroring the experience that is being narrated in the text. So much of whaling is about not seeing whales. And
98% of the time, I think it's about not seeing whales. Yeah.
Oh, and the rest, exactly. And so and we get right out the gate here with having to do an awful lot of thinking about going to sea, thinking about whaling, which for those of you reading along for the first time at home, you'll want to strap in, because there is going to be a fair bit of that,
including when we're at sea.
Oh, especially when we're
because you're still like, where's Moby-Dick? Okay, we got to see him like 8 or 10 times because like I know how movies work, and it's like, this is not a movie. This is a 700-page book.
Yeah, one of the things I find really interesting is sort of this divinity that Melville imputes to the ocean, to water in general. Here, let me find it. Why upon your first voyage as a passenger did you yourself feel such a mystical vibration when first told that you and your ship were now out of sight of land? And he also talks about the Persians and the Greeks all having gods of the water. And then really, really what I think is super interesting is, and still deeper, the meaning of that story of Narcissus, who, because he could not grasp the tormenting mild image he saw in the fountain, plunged into it and was drowned. But that same image we ourselves see in all rivers and oceans. It is the image of the ungraspable phantom of life, and this is the key to it all. And I think he's right, and I really do think this is the key to it all. We'll get to these various characters like Ahab, who is going to rage against the like this ungraspable phantom and like not being able to grasp this. You'll get Pip, who goes mad from this sort of encounter, and really all we get is the only person who's really able to encounter this and really articulate and tell us about it is Ishmael in this, and I think this relationship, this looking for the self in nature, looking for a reflection of the self outside of the self, is really what's crucial about this image of water, this image of looking for the divine or looking for something beyond ourselves. That's really critical here. But what do you think, Meg?
Yeah, I think something that's going to be that is interesting now in these pages, and something that is definitely going to stay incredibly, even centrally important for the rest of the thing, is the idea that like we are putting a lot of thoughts and feelings on the ocean, and the ocean is just the ocean. She is not really thinking about us back in the same way, and yet we are interacting with it. It's not like a one-way street. It's going both ways, but only one party is like not really anthropomorphic, but like putting those significances that you were quoting, like our myths and our religions onto it. The ocean isn't making a religion of us back. It's just that the whales are trying to kill us or something like that. So I think part of the romantic project overall was definitely like a quote unquote return to nature, as if we had left it and now we're going back to it where we had been before, and that there's some sort of inherent morality to it. And if we can only get into it in the correct way, then we can feel better about ourselves and our relationship with this thing. Some authors kind of stopped there, and that's fine. And those poems can be really beautiful. Even though they were largely written by rich people who like could take trips to the countryside, which were maintained by like the farmers, etc. In any case, but some authors like kind of kept going. And the really interesting American romanticists, the ones who I think still read as like shockingly good and innovative, like Walt Whitman and Emily Dickinson, keep looking at it and kind of create like a cycle where it's like, does the snake care about me back? Huh? And like Walt Whitman, who's pushing the boundaries of like what a sentence can do, is sort of having those same considerations of like when I'm lying in the grass, what's up with that? And like this is a question that I think Melville is asking in different ways in these literally questions that he writes down. Why is it that we made a Jove? We didn't have to do that, but we did. Why did we? And this idea of like we're putting a lot of significance onto it. Is this a harmful relationship? Does it help if it just makes me feel better and doesn't and sort of lets me not kill myself if I'm imagining a relationship? Maybe even parasocial is obviously a term that wouldn't have made sense. Although I think we could have gotten Herman Melville there. But the idea that like it's going one way, but we are interacting, is that exhausting in the end? Is this worthwhile? Is this harmful? Again, like we're going into the ocean for certain ways. So the idea of putting like a divinity on it is, as a romantic project, problematic in a good way, in a way that's like really generative and is going to be the engine for a lot of the sort of like middle chapters. Does the ocean know we're in the ocean? In some ways, the answer is yes, but in some ways, the answer is like it could not possibly matter less, except when you die.
Yeah. Another thing that's very important in this chapter is this idea of fate and predestination. And let me find it. Though I cannot tell why this was exactly, yet now that I recall all the circumstances, I think I can see a little into the springs and motives which, being cunningly presented to me under various disguises, induced me to set about performing the part I did, besides cajoling me into the delusion that it was a choice resulting from my own unbiased free will and discriminating judgment. Which, fantastic quotation there, but I think is really key and critical to the rest of the book and to the rest of the ideas of fate and predestination. What do you think, Jonny?
That whole passage is so gorgeously couched in theatrical language,
Yes.
and is so deliberately inviting us to think about the events that are going to follow in terms of something that has been staged, in terms of something that has potentially been preordained. Okay, we've already mentioned Shakespearean tragedy. He's giving us such a strong sense of how this is all going to turn out. And I mean, he even mentions, right, though I cannot tell why it was exactly the stage managers, the fates put me down for this shabby part of a whaling voyage when others were set down for magnificent parts in high tragedies. Well, he's explicitly sort of aligning himself with the movements of some kind of theatrical tragedy there. It doesn't sound great, does it, in terms of how all this is going to go?
Yeah.
And of course, it sets in motion the whole question of free will. Are we actually in control of our actions? Is there some other ungovernable force that is moving us? It's an issue that Moby-Dick raises without ever definitively answering or even having any kind of demonstrable opinion on either side. I think it remains fundamentally ambiguous all the way through on that particular matter. Who is doing the controlling?
We also crucially get in that thing, in what you just quoted, now that I recall all the circumstances, which is another thing of I'm telling the story now of something that happened to me 20 years ago. So part of the expectations of a text where the author is where it's mediated by an author even more than it usually is when you're reading fiction, or by author, I mean narrator. There's the idea of like, is he doing interpretive work for us that we don't see, that is already circumscribing our experience of the things he's trying to tell us happened to him? So it seems like the sentences are ostensibly doing work for us, but you could also sort of, as we know, Melville's a fan of like irony in the way the narrative is put on the page. He likes to play around with that. So it's kind of, like you were just saying, kind of a warning sign that he's like, this is kind of a tragedy. And we're like, this is chapter 1. But indeed, that's like key, as the text says, this is key to the whole thing, is how is the story being told to us? What is it telling us is like coming down the horn? What do I need to be prepared for? So now we're like, whales, tragedy, chicken.
Broiled fowl.
I'm ready. And it's like, and it's just like, we know it's coming, and I'm just, I have to be, I'm learning how to read the book.
Yeah.
And all of those weird techniques that we've talked about are not going anywhere. And in fact, will only get bigger and brighter.
You're completely right, Meg. And I think what you've really hit on there, which I think is going to be so important, is, again, like a Shakespearean tragedy, it's not about the what so much as it's about the how.
Exactly.
Here's how this is probably going to end up.
Mm-hmm.
But now let me talk you through how exactly we got there.
Yeah. That's great.
Yeah. Well, this has been such a fun conversation. And, we've covered a lot of very weighty topics. And even though we've spent almost an hour now just devoted to this one chapter, I feel like we've kind of barely scratched the surface or sounded the depths of this chapter. But yeah. Now, Jonny, with your excellent acting voice, would you mind reading us the last paragraph of this chapter, which I feel like is a great jumping off point into the rest of the book?
It would be my pleasure, Tristan. By reason of these things, then, the whaling voyage was welcome. The great floodgates of the wonder world swung open, and in the wild conceits that swayed me to my purpose, two and two there floated into my inmost soul endless processions of the whale, and, midmost of them all, one grand hooded phantom, like a snow hill in the air.
Love it. Well, thank you very much. Thank you, audience, for listening, and we'll be back to you very soon with episode 0, Etymology and Extracts.
You've been listening to the PequodPod with Tristan Bavol-Marques, Meg Fancher, and Jonny Wiles. You can support the show by visiting patreon.com/PequodPod, throw us a doubloon or two for some bonus content, and to help to keep the show going full sail. Thank you for listening, and until next time, call us the PequodPod.